Protein is the most important macronutrient when it comes to muscle building, but also muscle retention. Um, and that's probably the most important thing when it comes to the general population, right? So with protein, if you're doing any kind, even if you're not athletically training, but if you're doing any kind of athletic training, then even if muscle gain wasn't necessarily your goal, you're trying to strengthen your muscles and you're trying to strengthen, like bone density and things like that, right? So protein is the most important macronutrient because it is the building block of all types of bodily tissue, from hair, skin, nails, all of those things. So if you're not getting sufficient amount of protein in, particularly then when weight training, you're going to have some issues there. I think the issue it comes about is because there are a lot of like myths and scares around protein, and the recommended daily amount, I don't know what it's like for you guys, but in the UK it's like 0.8 grams per kilo is what's recommended to us in terms of grams per kilo of body weight. And that's because that's been the amount that's shown to avoid a deficiency in protein. So it's not at all where we would want to be for like an optimal health standpoint, particularly if you're training. So if you're training, your protein needs will be higher than someone who isn't training. But even then, from a, let's call it like a health muscle gain issue, it's super important, and there's a lot of research now to support higher protein diets being beneficial for health in a number of manners. From a weight loss perspective, it has an added benefit because of its effect on appetite. So protein in one meal and across 24 hours has been shown to improve people's satiety, which is basically their appetite regulation. So they're feeling more satisfied with singular meals as well as over a course of 24 hours with higher protein diets versus lower protein diets. So if you're trying to lose body fat, you're going to be more full over fewer calories, particularly because high protein foods, especially the lower fat ones, are quite bulky for their calorie amount. So, they're quite high volume for the calories you get from them. And then there's also research to suggest that despite zero change in the appetite hormones within a human, there's a lower spontaneous energy intake in people who try to eat higher protein foods. So their energy consumption around those meals is lower as well. So there's quite a bit of research to suggest that. The second benefit for weight loss with high protein is because, again, if you're putting yourself into a calorie deficit, so you're eating fewer calories in order to drop body fat, your protein needs are going to become a little bit more necessary, especially if you're training, because if you're training and your energy needs are slightly lower than maintenance, your body's going to try and pull energy from places, and it could pull it from your muscle tissues. So by keeping a higher protein diet, you're going to retain more muscle tissue and burn more fat compared to those with a lower protein diet.
Okay, amazing. So you kind of answered my second question of the difference between, because you can lose weight
Mm-hmm.
not eating enough protein. I mean, people are vegan
Yeah.
and go on a calorie deficit. So how big of a difference other than maybe satiety you just mentioned, the lose muscle, is there anything else that there's a difference between someone trying to lose weight who's not eating enough protein and someone who is and
I,
still on a deficit?
I think the biggest difference would be the muscle retention, because a big thing about calorie deficits can sometimes be like metabolic adaptation and like metabolic slowdown of like adapting to lower calories, and that would still happen regardless of muscle retention and protein. But it would be the issue of muscle retention mainly through a caloric deficit. And if you're vegetarian or vegan, it's just ensuring that you are getting in enough protein despite those food choices, because that's probably the biggest problem, is that within the research, when they compare people of equal caloric deficits for different protein, you'll see then a different amount of fat loss and a different amount of muscle retention in the groups based on the amount of protein that they have.
Okay. And how would someone calculate how much protein they need? Because what you said makes a lot of sense. Maybe people are operating under the number that you need to not be deficient in.
Mm.
They think that's enough, but they're exercising, they're lifting weights, they're wanting to lose body fat, they're wanting to gain muscle. So how would they figure out how much they need?
Yeah, so it depends on their goal and then the amount of activity they're doing. Because as I mentioned, if you're just regularly going about your life, that the RDA, the recommended daily amount, is that low threshold. But with the research that we've got ongoing, they're suggesting that even now, if you're a regular person who's interested in optimal health and not weight training too much, you should still be around 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And I understand a lot of your guys will work in pounds because you're out in America. So, I mean, 1.2 grams per kilo is going to be what, like two grams per pound, something around there of body weight.
I think so.
Off
That's
the
a
top
lot.
of my head.
Do you ever
It
have
feels a lot.
women, yeah, shocked that that amount of protein is what they need to be eating?
Sorry, it's going to be less than that, isn't it? We're going to need to go the other way. So it'll be about 0.5 gram per pound. So it won't feel that much because we'll go halves. And yeah, so when I'm working with women, it can be particularly difficult, especially then if they're athletically trained. Because again, so if you're doing something like endurance training, you might want somewhere between 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilo, which again then would be 0.6 to 1.2 grams per pound. And then if you're bodybuilding, you're going to be up on the higher end, 1.8 grams to 2.2 grams per kilo plus. And that can be quite difficult, particularly, as you said, for women. So one of the ways to work around that is seeing where they are now and then just trying to make small changes. There's no point trying to go from 0 to 100 mile per hour overnight. And in fact, just a small increase is going to be beneficial. And if we looked at the importance of when this protein is needed, pre and post workout are both super important times. And so if you're improving a protein serving sort of post workout, say, okay, well, like within an hour or two of training, why don't we have a post workout shake? That's probably going to be the easiest way a lot of people get, an extra 30 to 40 grams of protein in, which for a female weighing 120, 150 pounds, that's a big difference.
Okay. And I asked a nutrition expert one time, and then I said, I'll just ask Jonny because I trust him more. About protein shake. It was about protein shakes because that's
Sure.
at the gym. I don't give people direct advice. I just share information, and I think that's my role. I connect them to articles, or I just bring up how important protein is, and then we have a conversation about it. And one of my guy clients who is lifting way heavier now, he mentioned, I don't think I'm eating enough protein. Maybe I should just add a protein shake after my workouts. And when I asked my friend who's a nutrition coach, and I said, what kind of protein shake would someone get if they're lactose intolerant? Because that was the question.
Okay.
And they said, I would never have a fat loss client get a protein shake or use a protein shake. And I didn't know why. Nutrition's not my thing. So I was like, I'll just ask Jonny.
Yeah. I would have followed up that question with a big why. And that's probably coming down to maybe that's coming down to calorie intake or something like that. Because again, if you're looking at protein, the thing about protein powders and protein shakes, right, is that because there are so many, you might be out there thinking like, oh my word, like which one do I choose? And especially if there's like mass gainer shakes and like extremes and all these, and America, it's far worse than it is here in terms of supplementation. But if you were to get, obviously he's lactose intolerant, so he can't have whey because whey is made of dairy. He might be able to stomach a whey isolate protein because whey isolate is very, very microfiltered and so has very, very little lactose in it. But I do believe, and in America, probably true as well, you can get a lacto-free whey protein or just go for a plant-based protein supplement to be safe. So you'd probably want a more like, because plant-based proteins are incomplete proteins, you'd want a protein powder that was a combination of two different types. So a lot of the time, if you found a vegan protein powder that was like a vegan ultimate or something, it will have some kind of silly name, but it will be because it will be made of like a pea and a soy or a pea and a rice, or it's a combination of the two. So you're going to have a much more complete amino acid profile there and a higher leucine count, it's getting quite geeky now, but leucine is the main amino acid when it comes to muscle recovery and muscle building. So you want to kind of stimulate the leucine threshold, as it were, so having enough leucine in that post-workout meal. But hey, for a fat loss client, protein shakes, especially just whey protein shakes, so for people that aren't lactose intolerant, very, very low calorie per 30 grams, which is the standard serving, so per couple of scoops. Very low calorie, very high protein, and actually in the research, whey protein has been seen to be very, very appetite blunting. So if someone was to have like 2 scoops of protein with water for their meal and maybe like an apple, you're looking at a meal of sort of 250 to 300 calories that could actually keep them full for like 3 to 5 hours. So for someone looking to burn fat, it's actually a very, very effective way.
Okay, very good to know. And with this topic in mind, I've had multiple people say that they put collagen in their coffee or their drink for other reasons. Their nails grow, their hair grows a lot faster. Would that still be considered the good quality protein that they need? I think it's like 20 grams per serving. So could that be, could that count as their protein?
In terms of like adding it in, then 100%. Like I wouldn't be using collagen as like my only source.
Right, right.
And because, as you mentioned, because it's more of the building block for like skin, hair, nails, that kind of thing, it's useful for that side of things. We didn't get taught a huge amount about collagen, to be fair. Like ours was like overall protein and talking more about like whey and then food as intake. So I would always say vary your protein sources for the best bang for your buck. But if you wanted to get that collagen protein source, I would look up the amount of leucine that you were getting within that serving and see where it was at. And in terms of the amount of leucine, I'd need to look up the research again on what was optimal, but it's usually like a few grams of leucine that you would need in a certain serving in order to hit that threshold and stimulate muscle protein synthesis, which is what builds muscle tissue. Whenever people have a question about supplementation, I always tell them to go to examine.com. Have you seen it?
No.
So examine.com is a really, really fantastic website, and they do have a membership that you can sign up for, but most of their information is free. And whenever you are interested in looking at a supplement, you just type it into the search bar and it will show you a breakdown of all of the evidence, the level of evidence, in terms of like the way that the study was done, how strong it is, and the amount there are, and the magnitude of the effect and how consistency those research results are. And it'll break it all down, which is really, really useful. So you can type collagen in there, you can type any kind of supplement that people wonder about if I've not got extensive knowledge in. A lot of the time I say, look, have a look at Examine, because it'll give you a summary of the info that you need to know.
Oh, cool. I'll keep that in mind. That's awesome. Thank you. Well, those were the questions that I had. So thank you. That
No
was
worries.
perfect.
Yeah, no problem. I think to sum things up, whey protein in particular, and protein can sometimes get a bit of a bad rap. Like there are myths about like protein being damaging for kidneys and like a few other sort of myths around protein. And the kidney research is quite biased towards people who have poor kidneys. It's like, okay, if people have kidney issues, then let's not like overload their kidneys with protein. But if you're someone who has perfectly functioning kidneys, having a higher protein diet isn't going to have an adverse effect. And the whole issue around dairy is a big one as well. A lot of people are questioning whether dairy is like good for us at all. And all I'd say to people is that unless you have a definitive lactose intolerance that's been diagnosed, then you should be okay with dairy. And all the research we have in dairy in humans shows beneficial effects in their appetite, their health status, and the rest of it. But if you've gone a significant period of time without dairy in your life, you might have a small negative effect when reintroducing it, because lactase is an enzyme that's only produced necessarily, so you'll only produce it when consuming dairy.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. And so the idea of cutting something out and then reintroducing it to see how you react, and if you react badly, that means it's bad for you, is not necessarily
Not a smart move.
Okay. Well,
because
thank you
with that food group in particular, anyway, with other things maybe so, but
yeah.
I think we could talk a whole host about like intolerances and gut issues and things like that, because it's a whole separate topic. But there are like a string of foods called FODMAPs, which can cause certain stomach upsets, and dairy is, amongst those simple sugars. And so if you've got a high combination of FODMAPs, you might be having negative gut, you know, gut issues, and then removing dairy might, alleviate your symptoms. But it might have been just because of the total concentration of FODMAPs within your diet, not necessarily the dairy. So it can get quite complicated without outside eyes.
It sounds like it. Nutrition can get complicated. So if
Yeah.
someone really wants to take their nutrition under control and figure out exactly what they need to eat,
Mhm.
how do you work with people, or are you available? Is your team available to work with people?
Yeah, so at the moment I've got a full client list, but I've got another coach within the business who does have spaces available, and we work with people individually on a consultation basis. Like this, we would have video calls with our clients regularly to talk with them about their goals and what they've been trying, and we create then an approach that's going to work for them. And we are very habit focused. So we focus on sort of where the client is now, where they want to get to, and we'll create an action plan for them that they're happy with in terms of making the steps towards change. And then we break that down into manageable chunks so that they could feel confident in completing those steps sort of every week or every fortnight, depending on how often we spoke with them. And then, yeah, we would use different assessment tools like food journals and other things. So if someone came to us, for example, and they said they had IBS-like symptoms, we would start with okay, let's look at your food intake for the week. Let's look at things, and then we would talk with them about the FODMAPs and other things that might be affecting things like stress, caffeine, sleep. And we would just basically help people keep it simple, focus on the basics, and get results. So
Perfect. Well, I will make sure that people can find your website and stuff.
yeah, thanks, Lucy. Always a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much. This was really, really helpful.
No problem. All I'd say is that I realize I said a lot of things which people might disagree with or think, okay, I've heard something different. So if anyone wants to reach out and, get a research paper off of me or have a conversation with me, then do feel free to reach out. I'm not an argumentative person. I understand that people read different things. So I'm always happy to have a conversation with someone about why they think a certain way, why I think a certain way. And then I'm also happy to share research which supports my point of view if people are interested in reading that to kind of close that logic gap that might have been opened from this conversation.